Hare Krishna, everyone. Please accept my humble obeisance to all of you. Welcome to Wisdom. Wisdom is the nectar from senior devotee experience with Srila Prabhupada. And today we have special guest, His Grace Bala Prabhu from Saranagati, Eco Village, Canada. And he is so much doing Sharanagati will and continue doing, and he also direct disciple of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, founder Acharya of ISKCON. Before we start, we just do a little biography of Prabhu. So I invite Dipeshwari Devi Dasi to read his biography.
Hare Krishna.
Oh, Haribol.
Hare Krishna. Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam.
Haribol.
Very, very nice to see you after so long. Maybe 2-3 years. Thank you,
Thank
Prabhuji,
you.
for coming. And I am very grateful to see you. And it is my pleasure and honor to reading His Grace Balakrishna Prabhu's biography. And I would like to thank Sachipran Gauranga Das for giving me opportunity to read Prabhuji's biography. Thank you so much. His Grace Balakrishna Das, initiated by Srila Prabhupada in 1970. Temple President of Seattle Temple, 1975 to 1977. Teacher, Headmaster of 3 Gurukuls, Seattle, Philadelphia, and Vancouver, 1977 to 1987. Co-founder and pioneer of Saranagati Eco Village in 1982. Started certified organic farming business in 1996. Started ecoforestry plan and management of 2,000 acres forested land and adjacent to Saranagati community land. Organized festivals and permaculture retreats at Saranagati. Raised 5 children as devotee and have 7 grandchildren. Wow. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. It's nice to read your biography. And thank you so much. Stay tuned in Sweet Wisdom Talk. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, everyone, and Dipeshwari Radhika Devi Dasi for explain nicely his short biodata. We don't have time so much to go through. So please accept my humble obeisance, Prabhu. I am so great and gratitude that you are here in wisdom, and we can learn from your experience in Srila Prabhupada, because Srila Prabhupada is our heart and soul. So when we listen Srila Prabhupada, we get some energy, and that way we can continue our sadhana. So thank you again. You are so kind. Then you are in here, and your continued sadhana is Sharanagati, is Eco Village. So we are most eager to know more about this, your experience and Sharanagati life. So you can start right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
And please everybody stay strong.
Hare Krishna. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chakurun Militam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. This is a special mantra and prayer that we always begin our talks with, as taught by Srila Prabhupada. So here I am in the comfort of my home in Saranagati. I'm sitting beside my home altar. I'll give you a quick look at our altar. Those are our new
Mhm.
Gorni Thai deities made
Mhm.
from neem from Mayapur. And we have Jagannath and Krishna, Radha and Krishna.
Wonderful.
So this is modern preaching. I can sit in the comfort of my own home and reach out to so many people. And we take advantage of technology in this way. Technology is like a two-sided sword. It can be used for good and it can also be used for evil. And Srila Prabhupada, on the one hand, he was teaching simple living where everything is very low tech and simple. Technology tends to complicate our lives and make things so complicated. Actually, the demoniac people of the world, they are very attracted to technology because it is a tool for their further agendas. Just like in the Mahabharata, the story of Maya Danava, a demon who wanted to give Arjuna a blessing because Arjuna had saved his life from the forest fire, raging forest fire. And when Maya Danava offered to a blessing to Arjuna, Arjuna was not so inclined to accept it. And Krishna told him, don't accept a blessing from Maya Danava because he is so powerful with technology. He has mystical powers of technology, and devotees aren't attracted. Devotees should stay away from that. But in any case, we can use everything in Krishna's service. So even technology can be used in Krishna's service. And Srila Prabhupada himself demonstrated that, even though he, on the one hand, he was preaching simple living, where simple village life doesn't require so much technology. Still, Prabhupada used technology. He used it in printing books and dictaphones for helping translation. He used jet planes and so on to help with the preaching mission of Lord Chaitanya Sankirtan movement. So we understand the complete principle of renunciation. It's a foundational principle of Krishna consciousness that we understand that nothing is mine. Nirmama, nothing is mine. Everything belongs to Krishna. And my purpose is to use everything in Krishna's service. This is called Yukta Vairagya, the complete understanding of renunciation, where everything belongs to Krishna, so it should be used in his service. Anyway, today I wanted to tell you a special story. It's not an ordinary story. It's actually a historical account that I personally experienced. And I hope you find it interesting and relevant. But before I can tell you this story, I have to give you a preamble. And the preamble goes back over 100 years, close to 100 years, to a time in the 1920s when Srila Prabhupada, our spiritual master, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, was first met his spiritual master, His Divine Grace, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada. And in that first encounter with his spiritual master, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta instructed Prabhupada that he should preach Krishna consciousness in the West, in the English-speaking language. So this story that I'm about to tell you is connected in this way. It's a story about a trunk. You know what many of you from India or who have experience going to India and coming back to the West know about these trunks that come from India. They're metal trunks. I don't have a picture of one to show you, but I think many of you know what I'm talking about. Certainly Western devotees, when they went to India, they would return with big trunk loads of these metal trunks, big trunk loads of dhotis and saris and devotional paraphernalia. So my story is about a trunk. And but going back again to as early as 1944, Srila Prabhupada started publishing his first Back to Godhead magazine in English language while he was still a householder, while he was still in business, while he was still in India. But this idea of publishing transcendental literature in the English language began as early as 44 when the first Back to Godhead magazine came out. And then also at that time, he began to write translations and commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita, on the Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and other books as well. And finally, in 1965, actually in 1964, the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam with translation and commentary was published in India. Somehow Prabhupada got enough money together through donations and otherwise, and distributing his Back to Godhead magazine. He got enough money to publish the first volume or the first canto in 3 volumes. And once he had accomplished that in 1964, he understood, even at the advanced age of 70 years old, he made plans to come to America. But of course, he had no money, living by that time as a sannyasi. So he actually hitchhiked a ride on a cargo ship called the Jaladuta. When he boarded the Jaladuta in 1965 and early 65, he had nothing with him except a few rupees and a bag and an umbrella cane. And also accompanying him on that historical trip from Calcutta to New York City, there was a trunk. And that trunk was full of the 3 volumes of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. So that was in 1965 when he first arrived in America, New York. And very quickly, due to his preaching and due to the mercy of the Supreme Lord, the Krishna consciousness movement started spreading. And very quickly, there was a temple in San Francisco and in Montreal, and Seattle was one of the early temples, and Boston, and so many cities, Chicago. So in a short span of 5 years, there were quite a few temples. At least a dozen or more temples throughout North America, and even extending now into Europe. And it was in 1970 that I first moved into the temple ashram in Vancouver. And of course, at that time, there were no books to read, to speak of. There was an Upanishad and there were copies of Back to Godhead magazine. And somehow those volumes of the original Bhagavatam that came in the trunk with Srila Prabhupada, a few volumes of them went out to different temples. And when I first went to the temple in Vancouver, there was 1 volume of the original Bhagavatams that came in that trunk. And that's all we had for Bhagavatam class. We would make Xerox copy. If we visited another temple like Seattle Temple, not too far away, we'd make copies from their volumes. And in this way, we tried to learn, we were learning as much as we could just from the few books that we had. And then in 1972, by this time, BBT had already started publishing Prabhupada's books. And of course, their devotees were engaged in editing them and painting beautiful paintings to depict some of the pastimes from the books. So in 1972, the first volumes of the original of the BVT volumes of Bhagavatam started coming out, one volume at a time. Initially, one volume would come out and it would be sent out to the temples. And there was so much excitement by the devotees to get these new volumes of Bhagavatam. And then a few months later, a month or two later, another volume would come off the press and be distributed to all the temples. So in this way, these new BBT volumes of Bhagavatam, they came out and every devotee wanted their own set of Bhagavatam's personal set. Nowadays, when you go to visit a home of a devotee, you'll see big bookshelves of entire sets of the 12 cantos of Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, big libraries. Every devotee has a library of Prabhupada's books, but in those days, they didn't exist. So, and once these new volumes, in fact, I have with me, I'll show you here. This was the first BVT volume that came off the press. Let's see, I still have my original copy, and that's volume 1, and then volume 2, and volume 3.
Nice.
I still have my copies of those first BVT publications. Now, devotees, then all the Bhagavatam classes were based on these new BVT editions. And those original sets of Bhagavatams that came in that trunk with Srila Prabhupada, people lost interest in them. The devotees lost interest in them. They were kind of set aside and left in the corner. In the utility room on a shelf, they were gathering dust on shelves, and nobody had any interest in them. So at a certain point, after a couple of years, by 1974, 1975, these original copies in the trunk were very few and far between. Many of them were lost because devotees were so excited about the new BVT volumes. These older volumes didn't catch their attention. In any case, I, at some point in time, around 74, Krsna within my heart, he inspired me that I should, if there are any of those volumes kicking around, I should somehow save them. So I was able to gather up, and I'm going to show you these three volumes of the original Bhagavatams that were published in India and came in that trunk with Srila Prabhupada. So I keep these volumes on my altar. They're worshipable. And I think that they have special value. And in fact, I would like to read, if I can find the reference, how important these books became in the eyes of Srila Prabhupada. So here, I'm going to, oh, here we go, sorry. So those original volumes coming from India, keep in mind, Srila Prabhupada's coming from India. His English speaking was his second language. So even though he is very fluent in English, in the writing of those original Bhagavatams, there are many special typographic things and grammatical things that aren't exactly correct in the original language. But in this connection, I'd like to read you one verse from the Bhagavatam itself, in which it says, on the other hand, that literature which is full with descriptions of the transcendental glories of the name, fame, form, and pastimes of the unlimited Supreme Lord is a transcendental creation meant to bring about a revolution in the impious life of a misdirected civilization. Such transcendental literatures, even though irregularly composed, are heard, sung, and accepted by purified men who are thoroughly honest. Om Tat Sat. Those are Srila Prabhupada's words, quoting Srila Prabhupada from a verse in the first canto, 5th chapter, 11th verse. So those original volumes coming in the trunk from India, they in some on a certain level they could be seen as irregularly composed, but they were, when the devotees initially read them, they were heard, sung, and accepted by so many devotees that joined the movement and were inspired by those original books long before these volumes came out. And of course, nowadays, there's been so many editions printed in many, many different languages and different sizes and shapes of these Bhagavatam volumes. But I wanted to share with you the story of the trunk that brought these volumes to
Very
America
nice.
initially. And if you ever come to visit me at my and Bhumi Farms, I will let you touch your head with these books. So I'm trying to preserve those for future generations the best I can. So I want to read one other passage from the Bhagavad that I believe is relevant about Srimad Bhagavatam. So let me, I lost it. Anyway, sorry, I can't find the quote right now. Oh yeah, right here. No, I'm sorry. Anyway, the Srimad Bhagavatam is more brilliant than the sun, and it is the non-different than Krishna. It is worshipable as a deity of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So I keep it on my home altar, and we worship it just like we worship the rest of our deities. So that's my little story about a trunk that came from India in 1965. Actually, you can see it's not really a story about a trunk. It's more about the story about the contents that were in the trunk, namely the first 3 volumes of the Bhagavatam that Prabhupada published even before he came to America. So thank you. That's basically my story. And if there's any questions or discussion, does this program allow for people to ask questions,
Yes,
Sachi-Pran?
yes,
So if
yes.
there are people online, they can ask me
Yeah,
questions about
of course, they have a lot of questions for you.
And
Lot of
I think
questions.
some.
First of all,
Go ahead.
thank you so much for your wonderful story. It is very, very nice and tongue story. And this book is so special because this is directly hand from Srila Prabhupada. So it is very different. It is this book is not different from Prabhupada. Prabhupada write it, Prabhupada presenting it and take from India to United States. So
I
first,
have one question
okay,
before we go on.
mm,
I showed you I have 3 volumes, right?
yeah,
Now, these are volumes that I gathered up in remote places, and both in the Seattle Temple and Vancouver Temple, because I used to go back and forth in those
okay,
days. But the thing about these 3 volumes is that I have this, if you can see, where am I? You can
mm,
see volume 3,
mm,
and this one is also volume 3, and this one is volume 1.
okay,
So I ended up with 2 volume 3s and no volume 2.
no,
So if any devotee in this audience is
mm,
aware of a volume 2 somewhere,
two.
I would be willing to trade it for a volume 3. And that way I would have a complete set, one of each of the 3 volumes. In any case, it's perfect and complete as it is, but it would be nice to have a volume 2.
Anyway, this is Srila Prabhupada Prasadam. So, do you have any direct experience with Srila Prabhupada?
Yeah, I had direct experience.
Can you tell
I,
little bit
I,
detail?
I saw Srila Prabhupada many times
Mhm.
over the course of from 1970 to 1977. I wasn't one of the frontline devotees. I was a devotee in the background. So I saw him for the first time in San Francisco, Rath Yatra in 1971.
Mhm.
Actually, I was initiated even before I met Srila Prabhupada. I never met Srila Prabhupada initially. I met Srila Prabhupada's devotees. And that inspired, and I read it Back to Godhead, and I read Ishopanishad, and I lived in the temple in Vancouver, and I was initiated by mail. The temple, in those days, the temple president would write a letter to Prabhupada, not an email, a snail mail letter. And Srila Prabhupada would accept the recommendation of the temple president. So it wasn't until 1971, after I had been initiated and had my name, Bala Krsna Das, it wasn't until I went to San Francisco Rath Yatra in 1971. So I first met Srila Prabhupada at that time. And then subsequently, I saw him in many, Los Angeles, Portland, Oregon, uh, New York, New Vrindavan, and then in India, Vrindavan, Mayapur, Calcutta, Mumbai, Juhu temple. So, but I never really had a lot of direct discussion with Srila Prabhupada. So I was always in the background. On morning walks, I would be way in the back, at the back. So I know Srila Prabhupada mostly through his devotees and through his books. But those direct encounters with Srila Prabhupada are very special memories for me. Many devotees, the older devotees, they like to tell, they have special memory of talking with Srila Prabhupada and Srila Prabhupada giving them a special personal instruction.
Mhm.
So, in all those encounters with Srila Prabhupada only spoke to me directly on one occasion.
Mhm.
He gave me a direct order and direct instruction on one occasion. And that one instruction that he gave me, I wasn't able to follow that order. So I could tell that story, but it's a little bit amusing and it's a little bit embarrassing for me because he gave me one instruction directly and I couldn't follow it. So would you like to hear that story?
Yes, of course. It is very interesting.
So in 1974, it was the first time I went to India. I went there directly to Vrindavan. And I was there on behalf of the GBC at that time. The temple in Vrindavan, Krishna Balaram Mandir, was still under construction. It was a big construction site, cement and piles of gravel and bamboo supports everywhere. It didn't even look like a temple. However, even though the temple was still very much a construction site, the one building where Srila Prabhupada's quarters was finished. It was complete. And many of you who have been to Krishna Balaram know what I'm talking about, the Prabhupada's quarters in behind. So that was already built. Now, when I first went to Vrindavan, Srila Prabhupada wasn't there. But shortly afterwards, Prabhupada came to Vrindavan on a return trip from his one of his world tours. So then, because his quarters were finished, Srila Prabhupada would stay in those quarters. And somehow I was given the service at nighttime to guard the door so nobody could go in or out of the Prabhupada's quarters. So it's exactly the same today as it was then. And the front porch of that door that goes into Prabhupada's quarters, I had to stand guard. Not stand guard, but I was on guard for the night shift. And what we did, we just put one of those straw mats down on the right in front of the door, and I would lay down and rest right there. And nobody could get in or out because my body was sleeping right at the doorstep. But and I did that for a number of nights. I can't remember how many nights I had that service. But on one occasion at night, while I was sleeping on the mat right at the door, in the middle of the night, the door opened. Srila Prabhupada opened the door, and he had to, in order to use the washroom facilities, he had to go out and across the hallway area. So he opened the door, and there I was sleeping. So Srila Prabhupada had to step around me to get to go past me. And as he was doing that, I woke up and realized Srila Prabhupada was right there. So he went to the washroom facilities, and then a few minutes later, he came back. And I immediately offered my obeisances. And Srila Prabhupada, in a rather gruff voice, ordered me, go back to sleep. And I couldn't go back to sleep. I was wide awake by this time. And even though I was ordered by my spiritual master, I couldn't sleep. So that was the one direct order Prabhupada gave me personally, and I couldn't follow it. So that's one of my stories. So
Nice.
I also had one other opportunity. And this occasion, Prabhupada didn't give me any instruction, But in 1972, Srila Prabhupada actually went to Portland, Oregon. And all the devotees in Vancouver Temple drove down to Portland. That was very common practice in those days. As Srila Prabhupada traveled around the world on his global preaching tours, I think he went around the world, was it 13 times? So on one of those occasions, in 1972, he was able to come to the Portland, Oregon temple for 3 days. And at that time, I was very much involved in cooking. I was the head cook in Vancouver, and I used to cook for big festivals and so on. So when I went to Portland to be with Prabhupada, when Srila Prabhupada arrived in Portland, he came with an entourage. He had one devotee as secretary, one as an editor, and he had his personal cook and servant. At that time, his personal cook was Nanda Kumar, very nice devotee. He did all the cooking for Prabhupada. So because I was involved in cooking at that time, I immediately went to Nanda Kumar. As soon as they arrived at the airport, I went up to him and introduced myself and asked him if I could help him and assist with him in cooking for Prabhupada. So Nanda Kumar immediately embraced me and said, yes, of course, please come and help. So on the first day that Prabhupada was there, I assisted Nanda Kumar in all the cooking for Prabhupada. Nanda Kumar was cooking and I was assisting, chopping vegetables and so on. But on the second and third day, I did all the cooking, and Nanda Kumar was there to make sure I did it correctly. So in this way, I had the opportunity to cook for Prabhupada, and not only cook for him, but when his prasadam was ready, I could take it personally to his room.
Wonderful.
So
Wonderful.
that's a special memory for me.
Okay, thank you so much. It is wonderful memory. There is one question come from Shulachan Prabhu.
Okay.
He asking, Prabhu, can you please share the story of bowl as well? Darshan.
The story of what?
Bowl, BOWL. Bowl Darshan. I'm not very sure what is that. Do you have any story about regarding the bowl darshan? Bowl, BOWL.
Bold.
Yeah.
Stories about Srila Prabhupada's boldness?
Yeah.
Is that what you're well, certainly Prabhupada was a bold preacher. There's one amusing story that comes to my mind. When on one occasion, I wasn't there personally, but this is a story that's been told directly or has been recorded. Srila Prabhupada was in Los Angeles.
Which Prabhupada eat down? What? In which one Prabhupada eat dal? Okay, the bowl is, he means the Prabhupada eating dal, a special bowl for Prabhupada.
Oh,
you have with you?
When we cook for Prabhupada, we made chapatis, rice, dal, sabji. Yeah.
So do you have this bowl with you? Prabhupada offering to Prabhupada?
Oh, the bowl. That's a different story altogether. Okay. I have to save that story for another time. I've told that story to some devotees, but I do have a bowl that Prabhupada dal from. But that was a different occasion. I should save that story for another time. I have a few more stories.
Okay.
That bowl I could show you, but I would have to go and get it. It's in the other room.
It is long way to it is very difficult to get or easily can get.
Okay, give me 1 minute. I'll get it.
Okay, no problem. So this is His Grace Bala Krishna Das Prabhu explaining the sweet story of Srila Prabhupada, our Acharya, founder Acharya of ISKCON, and he have a lot of wonderful story. It is we can learn from that, and he also have Prabhupada so merciful that Prabhupada always take care his devotee. He advised him to go to the sleep. So Prabhupada understand how his devotee can take care. So this is the purity of Acharya. Acharya not only thinking about himself, also thinking his disciple too. So now we have wonderful darshan, bold darshan.
Well, I have to tell the story though.
Yeah, a story. Of course, if you got the story, then you can see.
So, many of you,
Hmm.
this is a story about a bowl, but it's also a story about Srila Prabhupada's first female lady devotee, an initiated disciple.
Who is that?
Well, many devotees are under the impression that Jamuna was Prabhupada's first initiated lady devotee, but actually, it's not true. So, the first initiated devotee, a lady devotee, was Janaki.
Okay.
The story goes that the first devotees, without going into too much detail, back in New York, in the early days of New York, Srila Prabhupada met a young couple, hippie couple, who when first brought Srila Prabhupada in and gave him shelter. Those two devotees went on to get initiated as Mukunda and Janaki.
Mhm.
At that time, they weren't married, but upon becoming disciples and students of Srila Prabhupada, they agreed to get married. And Prabhupada actually conducted the first marriage in Krishna consciousness to marry Janaki and Mukunda. Now, when that wedding was being planned and prepared for, Janaki wanted her sister to come and attend the wedding, but her sister lived in Portland, in the Portland, Oregon area, actually, and so she had the sister had to travel all across the country to New York at that time, and she got there just in time for the wedding, a day before the wedding. She knew nothing about Krishna consciousness. And she met Prabhupada, and she ended up helping Prabhupada cook the feast, the wedding feast. Prabhupada actually did the cooking for the feast, as well as perform the wedding itself. So Janaki's sister became attracted to Krishna and especially to Prabhupada, and she also ended up getting initiated as Jamuna. Jamuna's sister was the first devotee, and Jamuna came after her sister. So, as the story, fast forward a couple years, then Janaki and her husband Mukunda, as well as Jamuna and her husband, and another couple, Shyamasundar and Malati, the three householder couples went to London, England, to open a temple there. So they encountered many different challenges and difficulties. And in the process, they met the Beatles, George Harrison, John Lennon, Ringo Starr, and who was the other? Paul McCartney. So there's many stories surrounding that pastime and that era. But one of the things that happened was that John Lennon actually invited the devotees to come and stay in his estate because the devotees had no money and they were having difficulty finding a suitable temple. And by this time, there were quite a few devotees in England. So they all moved and stayed in John Lennon's estate. And Srila Prabhupada came at that time. And he also stayed at John Lennon's estate with the devotees. So at that time, Janaki was there and she was cooking for Srila Prabhupada. And she would make dal, chapatis, rice, and so on for Srila Prabhupada every day. And then at some point shortly after that, Janaki had some challenges, personal challenges and difficulties, and she actually left the Association of Devotees, and she ended up going back to Portland, Oregon. And many years went by when Janaki had no connection with the devotees. Even she had some challenges. Her and her sister Jamuna were at odds with one another and were not communicating. And 30 years went by. And then Jamuna actually ended up moving to Saranagati. She first came to Saranagati in 1998. And shortly after she got here and she built her ashram, some of you who have visited Saranagati have seen the ashram that Jamuna built and lived in for 12 years while she was here. So shortly after she came, she was feeling that she needed to reconnect with her sister Janaki. So many years had gone by. So she contacted Janaki, and actually Janaki came to Saranagati and visited Saranagati on a number of occasions, actually. But that first visit, when she first came, I invited Janaki and Jamuna to come to my home, and I cooked a meal for them. Dal, chapatis, rice, and sabjis from our garden and so on. And somehow, even though Janaki was separated from Prabhupada and the movement for over 30 years, something from that experience, somehow that dal and chapati and rice experience at having prasadam at my place, it was just a simple meal that I prepared. But it touched her heart. And it even brought tears to her eyes as she remembered her previous time with Srila Prabhupada. So before she left, she said, you know, I'm so touched by this experience that I want to give you a gift. But she said, I don't have the gift with me. I have to bring it. The next time I come to visit, I'll bring you the gift that I want to give you. So she, sometime later, some months later, maybe the following year, I can't remember now, she came back to Saranagati for a second visit. And she came to my home and she said, I brought you the gift that I promised you. So she gave me this gift, and she explained how when she was cooking for Srila Prabhupada at John Lennon's estate, she used to serve him dal, rice, and chapatis, and so on. And she served Prabhupada's dal in a particular bowl. And when she left the devotees, she didn't take anything with her except this one stainless steel bowl that she had been serving Srila Prabhupada dal in. So when she came, the gift that she gave me, She said, "You are the right person to have this bowl." I still have that bowl. I can show you. I have it here.
Oh, this is
So
nice.
this is the bowl that Srila Prabhupada ate his doll from at John Lennon's estate, given to me by Janaki, the first female devotee in our movement. And along with the bowl, she wrote a letter to me. This is a copy of the letter. If you like, I can read it.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
This was written in August the 12th, 2001, 20 years ago. She writes, in 1969, 1970, after we established the London Temple, Srila Prabhupada came. By then, George Harrison and John Lennon were our associates. John had a small row of guest houses on his property in Ascot called Tillinghurst. Prabhupada stayed in one of those cottages during a time his health was compromised. I did food preparation for him on occasion. I think I would cook for a week and then another person would cook for a week. He changed his diet because of health to 1 bowl of dal and 4 chapatis. Initially, he ate a medium bowl of dal and then requested a smaller bowl, which is why this bowl is in my possession. Let's see, the smaller bowl, which is why this bowl is in my possession and has been in my possession. It was and has been since it was removed from Prabhupada's hands. So she then writes, when you so graciously cooked for us and prepared those same preparations, I thought you were the one to now take possession of this object with all of its memories and blessings. Thank you for your lovely association and generosity, Janaki. So that's my personal letter from Janaki, the first
Very nice.
female in America in the movement. So if you come to Saranagati, you can see the bowl firsthand.
Thank you so
Hare
much.
Krsna.
So my few questions, but time is going fast. So first question,
Pardon?
next question is, what things make you attract more that you are joined Hare Krishna movement that time in ISKCON?
What inspired me to join?
Yes.
Maybe a combination of things.
Which one is most that?
Well,
Few is
Srila Prabhupada, even though we had very few books to read and access, we had very little access to books. But by the time I first came in touch with a Back to Godhead magazine and Isha Upanishad, I was already developing an interest in Eastern philosophy and spirituality, meditation, yoga, and so on. And I was involved with a whole network of young alternative people, radicals, politically and socially, and spiritual radicals, whom I got involved with when I was going to University of Victoria. So in reading those initial literatures, that's somehow captured my intelligence. The big questions that we had at that time: what is the purpose of life? What is the problems? All these problems in the world. that whole era was very much influenced by the war in Vietnam. In the early 60s and early 70s, many young people in America were really questioning the values of our Western culture, because we were, especially in the United States, at that time, if you were a young man, especially, you had to join the military for 2 years. And so many of them had to go to Vietnam to fight in a war that didn't make sense to anybody. It was a totally crazy situation. And many of those young Americans refused to go. But in refusing to go, they were being arrested and put in jail. So many of them escaped and came to Canada, and they were called draft dodgers. They were dodging the draft. So they were very much involved with us, my network of people at the university level. So we read these initial books on yoga and meditation, and they made a lot of sense. So I had never met Prabhupada, but the books and then the chanting, we started chanting doing kirtan. And that experience was satisfied my intelligence. The big questions that we had were satisfied in the teachings that Prabhupada gave us, even in the Back to Godhead magazines, articles, and in the Ishopanishad. Those things inspired us to become devotees. When my intelligence was satisfied by those books, then my heart became satisfied. So it was first an intellectual experience that transformed into a heart experience. I don't know.
Yes.
That's one way of answering the question.
Yeah, that's nice. Most of people is doing for philosophy. And next question is talk about life of Saranagati.
Life in Saranagati.
Yeah, how it is compared to city and eco village.
I don't know where to start there.
It's-
Life in Saranagati has many challenges. Of course, there are many challenges that exist in living in the city also. So we have challenges to live from one day to the next in Saranagati, just like you have. But the challenges are different. For example, people who live in the city, you take for granted so many things. You get up in the morning and you immediately go to the washroom and you flip on a switch to turn the electricity on, and you turn on a tap and the hot water flows, and you brush your teeth, and then you go about your business. In Saranagati, we don't take those kind of things for granted. Flipping on a switch for electricity is a challenge in itself. And hot water and cold water, these are all things that are supplied automatically when you live in the city. But in Saranagati, we have to, they don't come automatically. So Saranagati is very much a work in progress. It started initially inspired by Prabhupada's instructions to find a way to reintroduce the Varnashram system in modern society. And in order to do that, the village is the natural place for Vedic culture and Varnashram
Mhm.
to flourish. Village life is naturally a simple life. So we have been working towards this principle of self-sufficiency, where we can lead a simple life based on the local everything is locally supplied. Our food, our energy, our medicine, our entertainment, our financial exchanges can all happen locally, not globally. The Krishna consciousness movement and the Saranagati eco village is aiming towards establishing this self-sufficiency where the local communities, the local villages are autonomous and self-reliant. We don't have to depend on food coming from thousands of miles away. And the supply chains are especially being tested over the past year in the global situation. Supply chains that bring us all these things that we've taken for granted, whether our clothes, our food, our vehicles, everything is coming from somewhere else. And we're totally dependent on these supply chains. So Vedic culture, our Varnashram philosophy, our teachings coming from Prabhupada are directly opposed to this concept of globalization. We are firmly grounded in the principle of localization, not globalization. So we are revolutionaries in this sense because the world is trying. There's so much tendency and direction towards making everything global. So local people, even right here in our own area, Ashcroft and Kamloops area, there's the potential is there for us to grow all our own food, 100% of all our own food, all our own energy can all be produced locally, and yet it's coming from, nobody is doing it. So when these supply chains break down, people don't know what to do, and people are very stressed out. So as a result of the politics and global tendencies of the world today. So we in Saranagati, we stand for localization, not globalization.
Yes. Wonderful.
But
So next,
that's a big topic, but
this is a big topic. We cannot finish in short time, but the basic thing, how you interest the new generation, younger generation to attract in the Sharanagati, to live in Sharanagati? Do you have any plan of that?
well, we're seeing that many children have been born in Saranagati. Saranagati has been here for 40 years now. And we have observed children being born here, growing up here, getting married here, and having children here. So now we're experiencing third generation devotees here in Saranagati. Many of the devotees that grew up here feel very compelled to continue living here. My own children, they have moved away and gotten married and so on, but they all want to come back. Even the children that have gone away due to marriage and jobs and so on, they still want to come back here, and they want to bring their children back to Saranagati. So we have a very nice second generation of devotees that are living here with young families, with young children, even and I see that tendency more and more. So even though there are many younger devotees that don't live here now, see that they've grown up and matured somewhat, they're observing the challenges of modern society, and they're being motivated to come back to Saranagati, realizing in their maturity that Saranagati has a lot to offer that the rest of the world is lacking in. So
So next question is asking, so if anybody want to move in Sharanagati, so how they living, how they getting something to live independently? Yeah, because In city they can do work and job and this, but how source of income in Sharanagati in living, because there is no industry close by or
That's
something.
definitely a challenge that we have for sure. Every community, whether it's a village or a town or a city, anywhere in the world, they exist as communities because they have an economic rationale for their existence.
Mhm,
Sharanagati is not a community, does not have an economic basis. It
mhm,
was started with on a philosophical basis
mhm,
and spiritual basis.
mhm,
But we started Sharanagati here in this location because we have potential, and the emphasis on the word potential. We definitely have the potential to create a very strong and flourishing economy, local economy.
mhm,
We have hundreds of acres of fertile land. We have thousands of acres of forested land. And these natural resources coming from the land can be translated into a very flourishing economy. Not only do we have enough land to grow food for ourselves and our community, but there's enough land to grow lots more food for for sale and distribution, as well as our forested land. The forested the forested land, if managed correctly, can produce a great deal of economic benefit.
mhm,
So those are details that we can talk about at length, but we do have the potential. But one of the things, I'm not sure why Krishna arranged it that way.
mhm.
So far, all the devotees involved with Sharanagati, none of the devotees have a very Vaishya inclination,
Yeah,
business type of inclination. So it takes a business type of mentality. In Varnashram, we understand there are
yeah,
four different
yes.
types of mentality.
Mhm,
The Vaishya mentality is the Vaishya uh, order, Vaishya Dharma is meant to is there to uh, uh, create and manage the wealth of the community. So we're lacking in Brahmins, we're lacking in Kshatriyas, we're also lacking in Vaishyas. So we need good, inspired, proactive Vaishyas to help us get the economy of Sharanagati off going in a dynamic sort of way. So hopefully uh, this next generation of devotees and then this next phase of development of Sharanagati will include a whole economic side
mhm.
to it. Varnashram is very much, economics is very much a part of Varnashram. So we need to address that very question that you've raised. And I can say that certainly we have the potential here for a flourishing, self-sufficient community, supplying all our own food, our own clothing, our own energy, and so on. All the things that are needed are here in their natural form. We just have to uh, go through the steps of creating an economy for Saranagati. And then a lot more devotees could be living here, especially young families, devotee families. Jai.
Yeah, do you have any plan about that?
We're working on plans. There are plans in motion. And in fact, we have a number of new families, 6 or 7 new families just over the past year that are in the either
Mm.
already moved here or in the process of moving here. And some of these families are have financial resources to help stimulate this next development. But building the infrastructure, just like, for example, cow protection. Cow protection has an economic side to it. But in order to have, we have the potential to have a lot of cows in Saranagati and protect a lot of cows. However, there's a lot of money involved to build the infrastructure for the cows. Just to build a fence around Saranagati to be able to control and protect the cows is a very expensive and labor-intensive undertaking. Right now, we're just starting to build a second larger goshaw barn. We have to build, the barns have to be built to code, and they have to be built. There's a significant amount of money involved to build a proper barn, especially for cows in a northern climate, because 5 or 6 months of the year the cows need the shelter of a good goshaw that's warm enough. So we've just started the foundation of a new and enlarged goshaw, but the money is scarce, and to build this kind of structure is a very expensive undertaking. So the devotees who live here presently don't have the financial resources to do all these infrastructure development. So in the past, Saranagati and our movement in general has relied on donations to finance the development of our movement. But I don't know for that in the past 50 years, we've relied entirely on donations. But moving forward into the next 50 years of our movement's development, I think we need to start being a little more sophisticated in how to set up real economic systems,
Yes.
financial systems to help finance the infrastructure for a community. It's one thing to have a piece of land, but it's another thing to build the homes and the barns and the community centers and the temples for that community. Those are very expensive undertakings. And in the case of Saranagati, none of the devotees have a lot of financial resources. So it's taken 40 years for us to get to where we're at right now. It's taken a longer time. I have thought that if we had had an unlimited source of money, everything that we've done in 40 years could have been done in 5 years if the money was there to build all the facilities. But in any case, Krishna's in control, so his time frame is different than our time frames.
That's right. Okay, so our last question is, what's your advice to the new generation?
Well, there's so many things.
Yeah.
Certainly, the new generation needs to understand the importance, the underlying philosophical and spiritual values that Srila Prabhupada actually taught. With those underlying foundational principles, then so much can be accomplished. But if we neglect the fundamentals of Krishna consciousness, then we may be able to build a beautiful temple. We may be able to have a nice community, but if Krishna consciousness is not there, then what's the point? It's not sustainable. It's sustainable only because of the underlying spiritual and philosophical foundations. So as our movement spreads more and more, there'll be many different types of devotees. Some people we don't even they're like friends of devotees. They support us, they respect us, they're friends with us, but they're not fully practicing devotees. We have examples of that in our local area, in the town of Ashcroft. We have many friends, but they may even still be eating meat, for example, but they're not, but they like us and they support us. So there are different levels, but we somehow, as we move forward in time, we do need a real core of devotees who are really grounded and focused in Krishna consciousness and understand the deeper meaning and are actually following and practicing Krishna consciousness. Many people will be involved in the community, but we need that core. So I'm hopeful that our second generation and third generations will, out of all of those generations, hopefully there will be at least some who are seriously focused on Krishna consciousness. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Thank you so much for your sharing wonderful story and Srila Prabhupada's experiencing, and also Saranagati. And Saranagati is hopefully very positive and depends on time. When the time comes, everything will be getting very nice because your land have everything is there, need to move somehow. And of course, it is the need bless of Srila Prabhupada and Krishna, then will be success. When we are doing wonderful uh, duty, we are continuing 40 years, and now is a lot of comfort in Sharanagati. Previously is nothing. Now have water, heating, everything is there almost. So it is very easier to run. Beginning is very hard actually. It's because nothing. Now everything is there. Need to move some energetic person come and do some work with instruction of senior devotee. Then project will be success. And we hope one day will be beautiful eco village in Western in Canada. And again, thank you for your kind consideration to come here. And thank you all of who are watching. And if I invite you, if you don't know Sharanagati, please go there. It's a wonderful place to live 1 day or 2 days. And Balakrishna Prabhu is so kind, help to live there. And you can get benefit from there. It's very natural, everything. And of course, it's Krishna related like Vrindavan. It's wonderful. So thank you again. And we are next week, waiting for next week for wisdom.
all right.